So these are some questions for us to think about.
I'm not challenged this order. Right. As Fred said, you've written the book quite a while ago, and the thing that has really changed are the numbers, and they changed for the worse. So we will do a bit of a revision now to our basically empirical part in the chapters while we do our presentations now. What has not changed is the direction, the course of the crisis, and as of now, actually, it's not a forecast, it's not a conspiracy theory anymore that the crisis is deepening and it's a double-dip recession. So I'll talk about the Eurozone, European Union at large, and give some fresh numbers, but mostly I want to discuss about alternatives for a progressive united left campaign against austerity, and I will touch a bit on the controversies within the left, particularly regarding the euro and where do we stand in terms of the European Union, and which is far from being uncontested, obviously. Well, today, European Union is the epicenter of the crisis, and compared to the US, where the crisis originally started, actually Europe is doing much worse. Doesn't mean that the US has recovered, but it's actually back in terms of the at least sheer numbers regarding national income. It's back to the pre-crisis peak of 2008. If we look at European Union as a whole, 27 countries average, the last figures we had until recently, well, 2011, 2012 is still provisional. Compared to the peak before the crisis, European Union's gross domestic income is still almost 1% less, so it is far from recovery. And so, of course, a very uneven, very divergent process after the crisis within Europe. Germany basically is the only country where national income is now higher than it was before the crisis. And that was pretty much driven by demand, mostly from China, but also from other BRIC countries, emerging markets. And obviously this recovery, very weak recovery by the way, roughly 1% more income compared to the pre-crisis, has not been able to pull out the rest of Europe together with that. And now there are worries also about the so-called German recovery once the rest of Europe is in a deeper crisis. Among the core countries, Britain is performing towards the worst. Basically, national income is more than 3% less than it was before the crisis. So it's far from recovery, and it's deepening towards more recession. And if we look at Italy, again a core country, but very much fragile with the attacks of financial markets, basically it has lost 4% of income compared to the pre-crisis as of today. And of course the situation in the southern periphery or western periphery, Ireland, is really alarming, with up to or more than 10% loss in national income compared to the pre-crisis. And of course the recession is back in these peripheral areas. Just a brief word about Eastern Europe. Basically the starting convergence is being reversed between the East and the West with the crisis, and despite a strong growth performance in 2010, Eastern Europe today has basically lost up to 18% of its GDP in the Baltic countries, or in Hungary, for example, 5%, in Slovenia, some 6% of GDP compared to the pre-crisis levels. So basically, the current situation and policies of the ruling elite is just deepening the imbalances and divergences within Europe. It's far from solving the origins of the crisis, which are related to those imbalances. The ruling elite is basically repackaging the whole crisis as a public debt crisis, which is of course wrong if you look at the data. The increases in public debt has been completely a result of the crisis. In most of these countries, other than in Greece, before the crisis, there was no public debt problem or no serious budget deficit problem. And thanks to the bank rescue packages, the loss in tax revenues because of the deep recession, and also some counter-cyclical fiscal spending because of the, say, rising unemployment. Obviously, budget deficits have picked up, and if it weren't for these budget deficits and increasing public debt, we would have already been in the Great Depression. So they prevented the Great Depression, saved the banks, but now they're trying to repackage it such that they avoid reversal of the roots of the crisis, they avoid taxing the rich, they avoid reversing the inequalities which are in the roots of this crisis, and they make the working class pay for this crisis via austerity packages, wage freezes, which translate into real wage losses for the majority of the working people. Obviously, this is a dead-end road. It is a class logic, so there is a micro-rationale to it, but in the macro sense, it's also a dead-end road. And given the lack of a Bonaparte to solve this crisis for them, they're going full speed towards this dead-end road. And obviously, these all austerity packages, loss of income for working people is turning this crisis into a jobs and incomes crisis. It's if they don't reverse the course, which is a very debatable situation, obviously, given the elections in France, given the coming elections in Greece, and obviously the consciousness about the problems even at the heartland of Europe, say in the ECB, reversals are likely, but as it stands, ECB president is, for example, saying, well, we have to make Europe competitive, maybe not so much through austerity policies and wage freezes, but making labor markets flexible. So he's not saying much when he says we need a growth pact for Europe. There is, though, elements of now some consciousness that it's a dead-end road for them as well. But how do we then stand against this united ruling elite policy in Europe with its all backs and forwards? Obviously, we need, the elections in France is very clear that we have everything to win from a left unity and everything to lose if it's not out there. And then this is also a lesson to draw probably for Britain. So what we need is a very basic transitional program addressing some very common points to challenge this mainstream ruling elite class agenda. I summarize that united program around 4 issues: simple opposition to all cuts, opposition to austerity. Second, reverse the origins of the crisis, make the responsible pay for the crisis, which means have a progressive taxation agenda. Again, very simple, very basic demand. Progressive income tax, progressive tax on also wealth, does not just on income. Financial transaction taxes, higher corporate income taxes, and basically the whole thing is to say we didn't create this crisis and the rich, the wealthy should be paying for this crisis that they have created. The third common point, I think, is very clear for everyone. We have to do something about financial markets, and here the answers have to go beyond financial regulation. So the idea is clear to everyone on the left that we have to take banking sector, financial sector under democratic control. How can we do that is maybe the issue of debate, but I think as a starting point it's already a very good common ground. My take on it would be to call for public ownership with a very broad participatory agenda, with the democratic control of the working people in the financial sector, also other stakeholders, thus the communities, the consumers, regional representatives, and so on. And fourth, to reverse the public debt problem, which is not the reason of the crisis, but an outcome of the crisis, we have to really look into the debt. We have to look at the sources of the debt, and there are examples of that elsewhere. That goes through a debt audit, looking at the origins of the debt, looking at the parts that are odious or illegitimate, and basically having a broad participatory democratic campaign about it, and then cancelling part of this debt. Obviously, the debt is a big drag on any other demand that we would put forward, and there's a very good chapter on that by Eric Toussaint, and there's actually more work being done around several concrete debt audit campaigns in Greece, also one being initiated now in Portugal, and a quasi-debt audit idea in Ireland is on the way. So I see these as common points which are not very much contested, but it's not so clear that the left is uniting around building a movement. But at least on the ideological ground, there are a lot of common stakes around these. The controversy comes when we start talking about the Euro and the European Union. Obviously, with respect to Euro, it's very clear to me that we need a position that combines the interests of the working people in the periphery as well as in the core. And I see more common points than contradictions among those interests of the core and peripheral working people. So we need an internationalist position that doesn't put the Euro into the core, but puts our demands and alternatives into the core of the strategy. Basically, this would be about saying no to austerity, calling for a debt audit, looking at the debt, and restructuring or cancelling the debt, and obviously denouncing the treaties that make up the European Union. So the idea is, if one country that is under immense pressure of the austerity policies of the IMF, of the ECB, of the European Commission, if they could stand against these policies, that would give them a lot of area of maneuver, and that would most probably lead to a series of reactions from the other countries. It will lead to certain domino effects, and it will lead to a lot of time. And time is all we need in these things. Obviously, there is no mechanism that would automatically lead to the expulsion of one country just because it's not accepting those austerity policies, just because it's basically declaring a moratorium of the debt until the debt audit is concluded. So that would tie the hands of the ruling elite quite a bit and lead to a chain reactions of mobilizations across Europe. At least that should be the whole, that should be the starting point. A unilateral exit from the Euro or the European Union doesn't necessarily create the same environment of international solidarity and domino effects of chain reactions of international mobilization. Staying within the structure but saying no to the treaties, saying no to austerity would create a lot more room for spillovers and solidarity. Now, I briefly want to touch, of course, to this idea of common interest and why should that lead to domino effects, say if it starts in Greece, not just in Portugal, Ireland, Spain, countries who are seriously under threat of very dramatic austerity programs, but maybe also workers from Germany. Well, because obviously any policy of austerity is just deepening the debt crisis, and it's making the debt even more unpayable because austerity leads to lower income at the national level, thus that the GDP ratios go up, the financial markets ask for higher risk premiums, higher interest rates, and that just deepens the problem of debt. It just increases the debt to GDP ratios dramatically. So that's the dead-end road. And if they go towards that road, basically a debt restructuring with an effort to bail out the private banks with headquarters in Germany and France and Belgium will be unavoidable. It's not just the progressive left saying that. Bucher of the Citibank, chief economist of the Citibank, is saying a restructuring of the Greek debt up to 80% is unavoidable. So private sector has to pay that bill. When the private banks pay that bill, the working class of Germany and France and Belgium will be asked to basically use their tax incomes, accept deeper austerities and accept deeper cuts in their wages to fund the bailout packages, rescue packages for the banks. So if those people want to break this vicious circle of austerity, debt crisis, bank bailout, further austerity in their home countries, they also have to call for debt audit and debt default in those peripheral countries. This is also in their interest. That's one point. The other point about common interests is that if you want to take capital under leash again, basically it's much easier if you do it at European scale. So say if you want to impose capital controls again, higher taxes on capital, it's much easier to do it in a larger integrated economic area than doing it, say, just in France. So basically the popular right-wing demand in France about exiting the European Union is not really very helpful if they want to discipline their own capital. And last, obviously, all these policies have to come together with a broader European policy, which also calls for redistribution within Europe, across regions, across countries. So then the question is, why should the French or the German workers pay to restructure the economic structures, infrastructure, say, in the peripheral countries like Greece or Spain? Why is that appealing to them? Well, because if they don't do so, those peripheral countries will turn into cheap labor havens, more so than they are currently, and obviously no working people in the core countries have any interest in having very cheap arm's length neighbors where their capital will then soon be relocating. So obviously, to avoid that, fiscal transfers are in the interest of workers in the core countries as well. And the second issue is about, of course, the consequences of exit. So what would happen if one country would exit from the Eurozone? Looking from it from a progressive point of view, many people, many economists on the left think that, well, it will give more area of maneuver for policy, for progressive policy in those countries. I doubt it, particularly because an exit from the European Union will deepen the crisis. Most countries voluntarily or involuntarily will have to leave the Eurozone, so a Greek exit will be followed by Portugal, Ireland, even Spain, and maybe even Italy very soon. So a total breakup will mean that there will be chains of competitive devaluations of the currency. So the argument pro-exit is saying that a devaluation makes the Greek economy more competitive, so it can export, it can grow, and it can have the revenues for a progressive economic policy stance. No, this is not correct, because it will not be only Greece devaluing, but all other countries. So basically there will not be much gains in competitiveness. And this sort of beggar-thy-neighbor policy is also not necessarily very conducive to creating a solidaristic internationalist working class mobilization across the countries. So, and I have my doubts also about this policy, because a devaluation in Greece, a very import-dependent country, will very quickly increase domestic prices. Why? Because Greece is importing a lot of inputs for domestic production as well. So when you devalue, the cost of those imported goods go up, thus firms reflect those input cost increases to their output prices, there is higher inflation. Well, would the workers be able to index their wages to higher inflation? No, not in an environment where unemployment is peaking in the middle of the crisis. So basically, workers will be losing their purchasing power. Experiences in other developing countries where devaluations took place show that real wages have basically plummeted by some 30%. These are experiences from Latin America, Turkey, and so on. And worse than that, probably a breakup of the Eurozone will really lead to a 1930s-style Great Depression. And I don't see a small country in the periphery managing an anti-capitalist transition in the middle of a Great Depression, isolated. It reminds me of socialism in one country experiences of the Soviet Union. So where do we move from here towards a progressive European Union? My take on it is to call for alternatives at the European Union level, a different fiscal policy, monetary policy, and industrial policy, targeting multiple targets of full employment, decreasing inequality or increasing equality, and ecological sustainability. That goes to calling for a European minimum wage, not one single wage, but say a minimum wage that is 60% of average wage in each country to facilitate convergence. It goes to European-wide social benefits, unemployment benefit systems, and we need to finance that. How? We need a large and progressive European Union budget to be financed by progressive taxes on higher income groups, but also higher taxes in richer countries of Europe. That calls for redistribution. We need a European Central Bank, but we could rename it as the People's Bank of Europe, which has to be responsible and following the policy priorities of, say, the People's Assembly of Europe, a democratic European Parliament as opposed to the one that we have today. And obviously we have to not just reject austerity programs, but also build a bridge from there to a different system to capitalism, an alternative to capitalism, challenging this logic of corporate ownership and finance, and we need to call for also rethinking ownership structures in industry as well as finance. Obviously, hopefully, after this very broad agenda, we will go now in depth into other issues of technological sustainability.
Sean Thompson?
Yes. Okay, what I propose to do is to start and finish this summary of my contribution to the book with the first and last paragraphs, and sort of probably improvise a bit in between. Anyway, so I started the chapter with a quote from that sort of proto-Trotskyist one, in one way of looking at it, William Morris, when he said, it's right and necessary that all men should have work to do, which shall be worth doing, and be of itself pleasant to do, and which shall be done under such conditions as would make it neither over-wearisome nor over-anxious. Turn that claim about as I may, I cannot find that it is an exorbitant claim, yet if society would or could admit it, the face of the world would be changed. Now, it seems to me to be an absolutely perfect example, absolutely classic example of a transitional demand about 50 years before the term was coined. We face, and the reason I prefaced my chapter with that is because what I was trying to do was to develop an alternative, or elements of an alternative industrial strategy